Well, good evening, everybody. It's time for a nice fireside chat. It's been a while. Got a few things in store here tonight, as it is kind of a quiet Sunday night. A lot of things coming to play. And of course, if you're paying attention to the news, there's kind of three themes in that are kind of playing out in front of us, right? We got the election-related stuff. We've got the COVID. And of course, the not very much talked about, the quote-unquote Great Reset stuff. And tonight I'm going to kind of hit on all three of those. I've only got about 3 articles in that I'm going to cover here. So sit back, relax. Not really going to share anything. I will let the headlines roll through, though. I'll go ahead and put those up there. But aside from that, we'll have a little discussion about some of the things that are going on there and where things look like they may head here in the coming week. So it's kind of getting down to the nitty-gritty, right? If you look at the landscape, all the various swing states, I've been tracking these now since Election Day, 3rd of November. Looking across the landscape at the Arizonas, the Nevadas, the Georgias, North Carolina, which is pretty well decided at this point. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, there's been a flurry of activity. You got the Lynn Woods, you got the Sidney Powells and everybody else, all these lawsuits and that going through the courts, gonna get run through the appeals, everything else. And by the time it's said and done, it'll probably end up in the Supreme Court. You're seeing Alito here in the last 24 or 48 hours moving up some dates there to potentially get inside this window before all the various electoral college electors are selected by the 14th. And of course, we'll see how that plays out. So the article on that I want to touch upon here tonight actually goes back a couple days. Goes back to about the 2nd at WorldNet Daily. Says Georgia runoff suddenly important to wise architecture of Constitution. The founders didn't envision threat of one-party rule. So kind of an interesting article. I'll touch upon the constitutional side of things, which you don't hear much about, I'm sure, because the Mockingbird media has already decided it for us, right? But Constitution be damned. Well, it says if Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff win Georgia's January 5th Senate runoffs, Democrats will control both houses of Congress as well as the presidency. The Republican Party, which won nearly half the national vote, will have no check on the Democrats aside from the Senate's filibuster rule. Although that rule requires a supermajority to pass some legislation and appointments, it can be abolished by a simple majority when the new Senate convenes, right? Preventing one-party rule is one of the strongest arguments advanced by Republicans incumbents, Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. They're reminding voters of the threat posed by Senate Democrat leader Chuck Schumer, who proudly announced, "Now we take Georgia, then we change the world." Now, that might be a winning line for national fundraising, but it's more problematic for the Georgia electorate. Not many voters there want to change the world. So Warnock and Ossoff are downplaying it. Don't expect to see Schumer on the stump in Atlanta, Augusta, or Macon. Now, it's understandable the national debate should focus on which party will control the Senate and just how radical the Dem program will be if they do. But just beneath the surface lurk potential constitutional issues which have received almost no attention. The basic problem is this. Although America's founders were deeply concerned about tyranny, centralized power, and the suppression of individual rights and constructed institutional barriers to prevent those abuses, they never envisioned the mechanisms that pose serious threats today. Like big tech, the level of censorship and oppression and that we see here. One of those threats is one-party rule. It's understandable the founders missed that since they worked before the age of entrenched and nationalized political parties. The closest analogues were England's Whigs and Tories, but they were a far cry from modern parties. The political world envisioned by America's founders was populated not by parties, but by cross-cutting factions, much like today's interest groups. The Federalist Papers, especially the famous Number 10, written by James Madison as Publius, argued that in a large republic like America, multiple factions would emerge, push against each other, and usually block any one from dominating. And of course, yours truly here has also covered the Federalist Papers, which, by the way, are all archived on my backup channels. You can check that out from, it's been almost 2 years ago now, surprisingly. Holy cow. Doesn't seem like it's been that long, but it has. James Madison and Federalist number 10. And of course, keep in mind back then, of course, they only had 13 colonies to deal with, and they penned all the letters to New York because they were the hardest ones to persuade at the time. And of course, today it's the same deal. New York, California, the coastal states want to try and overrule the middle part of America, and this was some of the preventative measures they put in place to prevent that from happening, of course. So to prevent government authority from becoming too centralized and oppressive, the Constitutional Convention divided that authority among the 3 branches. Each one they configured would have strong institutional interests in preventing the others from encroaching. It was a profound insight, and a remarkably successful one. But with the rise of modern political parties, it faced a challenge that no 18th century politician could imagine. Strong political parties unify their members across the legislative and executive branches. The stronger their common interests as Democrats or Republicans, the weaker their institutional interests as members of House or Senate, if those interests diverge from fellow partisans in the other house or branch. Put differently, the rise of political parties undermines the separation of powers and, with it, one of the founders' barriers against consolidated oppressive power. So, the idea of separating governmental powers to prevent tyranny was first proposed by the French jurist Charles-Louis de Secondat, Baron de Montesquieu. His 1748 book, De l'Esprit de Louis, was translated immediately into English and read attentively by the founders. They adopted Montesquieu's idea because it helped them solve some knotty problems of constructing a new constitution. Actually, they faced 2 problems that pulled them in different directions. Those problems and their solutions bear directly on America's political divide today. The first was to create a more capable, energetic central government. The second was to prevent that government from expanding its powers and encroaching on Americans' liberties. Solving the first problem is why the Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia in 1787. The country's initial constitution, the Articles of Confederation, had proved too weak to cope with foreign enemies or local rebellions. It was little more than a loose amalgam of states, without the power to tax or organize an army or navy. But if Madison, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, George Washington, and their colleagues wanted a more energetic central government, they also feared one that might gradually expand its powers and trample individual freedom. Likewise, they feared the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority, which could threaten personal liberties, also called out in Federalist number 10. They were determined to prevent that, too. So obviously the key thing from the Federalist Papers, from the Constitution, which is in essence a contract between us and the consent of the governed versus the government at that time, is the degree of individual liberty and that we were to have. Their powers were supposed to be few and defined. They only had 4 things at that time, and now look what it has transgressed into, right? We got faceless bureaucrats dictating, and basically under the color of law, all these things behind the scenes. So, limiting these dangers is where the Bill of Rights, federalism, and Montesquieu's separation of powers doctrine came in. The Bill of Rights, which some states demanded before ratifying the new Constitution, stood as a bulwark of individual liberties. Neither Congress nor the President could abolish the rights if specified. Later, the courts ruled that state legislatures could not abrogate those rights either. Well, of course, the rights are not something that are handed out by the government. At the end of the day, they come by the hand of God, period. They are inherent. They're not something that can be readily taken away. Those would be called privileges, if that were the case. If the government wants to hand stuff out, guess what? They can also take it right back. And those aren't rights at all. So besides specifying those inviolable liberties, the Bill of Rights had a second purpose, which is often overlooked. It sought to protect citizens and states against an overly powerful central government. That protection was codified in the 10th Amendment. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. You and me, we the people. Modern commentators and most federal judges simply ignore that amendment, but that absence of delegation is the constitutional core of America's federal structure, intended to protect against overweening central power. The new Constitution not only sought to ensure individual rights and preserve some measure of centralized authority, it offered yet another safeguard against tyranny. It required the central government to distribute its sovereign powers among the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. The crucial point is that those powers are partly separated, partly shared. They are not consolidated. The Constitution assigns a distinctive role to each branch in the first 3 articles. That's why Congress, for instance, is called the Article 1 branch. This wise architecture has survived for over 2 centuries, but, like a battered shoreline, it has eroded in several ways. One is why the Georgia runoffs are so important. Perhaps the clearest indication of how partisan interest undermines each branch's institutional interest came in 2013 when Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid abolished the filibuster rule for federal judges at the trial and appellate levels. Reid's stated goal, shared by fellow Senate Democrats, was to confirm President Barack Obama's judicial nominations and maintain liberal control of the courts. To achieve those short-term partisan goals, Reid deliberately weakened the Senate's long-term institutional power. Republicans warned Reid this was a grave mistake, and yet still pursued the same strategy when they retook the Senate. Their leader, Mitch McConnell, extended Reid's rule to include Supreme Court nominations. In both cases, the Senate's veto power was diluted so the majority party could govern when it controlled both the Senate and White House. The point here is not whether these rule changes are good or bad. The point is that the changes reflect a partisan political environment that undermines our separation of powers architecture. Nor did our nation's founders anticipate a world in which the 10th Amendment would be treated like an outdated relic, where Albany, Hartford, Austin, and Salt Lake City would have little sway in their own affairs compared to Washington's ever-growing authority. Part of this change occurred when the Constitution was amended so voters, not state legislators, chose senators. The 17th Amendment, ratified in 1913. That amendment robbed state houses of their most powerful tool to limit Washington's growing authority. Another equally important change occurred when the Supreme Court gave the federal government nearly unlimited authority to regulate economic activity. Until 1937, when Franklin Delano Roosevelt threatened to pack the High Court, the justices had overturned several major New Deal programs as unconstitutional. After FDR's threat, the justices caved. They believed Roosevelt's threat was credible because his party dominated Congress and because the Constitution did not formally limit the court to its traditional 9 justices. It didn't take long to see how the Supreme Court's refusal to check Washington's expansive regulatory power manifested itself in the lives of everyday Americans. The most far-reaching jurisprudence was a 1942 decision, Wickard v. Filburn. The case dealt with a farmer who grew some wheat to feed his cows. The federal government wanted to regulate all the nation's agriculture, including the wheat grown and consumed entirely on Roscoe Filburn's small farm. The problem, at least for FDR, was that the Constitution's Commerce Clause gave the central government the power to regulate only interstate commerce. The goal had been to create a unified national market by preventing states from erecting tariff barriers against each other. No matter. The now cowed Supreme Court concocted a contorted rationale to give Roosevelt his victory. Filburn's wheat counted as interstate commerce because, believe it or not, his self-sufficient farming meant he wouldn't be buying or selling that grain on interstate markets. Say what? Does that make sense to you? This bizarre reasoning, which has stood for 8 decades, gives the federal government almost unlimited regulatory power. The court-packing threat, the Filburn decision, and a string of like-minded rulings highlights another crucial point: the encroachment of partisan politics into the judicial branch, where it is now firmly, if uneasily, embedded. Democrats are well aware that a more conservative Supreme Court could limit or even roll back the administrative state's expansive rulemaking authority. That's one reason the nomination fights have been so brutal. The stakes are high. Now, these constitutional issues cast a long shadow over Georgia's runoff elections. Control of the Senate would matter far less if the founders' vision still applied. They had hoped Congress's institutional interests, an independent judiciary, and the separation of powers would protect citizens against overly centralized power. There is no such protection in today's thoroughly partisan world. Although Republican victories in Georgia would offer some balance to a Democratic White House and House of Representatives, they would offer far less than the founders expected. President-elect Biden, like his predecessors, has already said he will launch his presidency with a flurry of executive orders. Many will overturn earlier orders from President Trump. These fiat laws, like presidential signing statements, shows that the executive branch is misnamed. Its main job is no longer to execute the laws or even propose them to Congress. Its main jobs now are to 1. Create the web of rules, regulations, and administrative decisions that govern the country, and 2. Attempt to control the vast bureaucracy, which seeks to govern on its own, independent of any elected authority, including the president's. And isn't that kind of what POTUS has been dealing with, this encroachment of the swamp and why it runs so stinking deep? The bureaucracy may be called the executive branch, but it is, in many ways, an autonomous fourth branch of government. Its powers derive from vague laws, which give administrative agencies the power to set the detailed rules that actually govern citizens, firms, nonprofits, states, and local authorities. Congress, instead of passing the laws that govern the country, is now reduced to an oversight role, trying, and mostly failing, to oversee the agencies that actually do the governing. Controlling this bloated, undemocratic blob is no easy task, and shrinking it seems nearly impossible. The founders envisioned the core dilemma, creating a central state energetic enough to act, but constrained enough to stay within constitutional bounds. The path to restoring more ordered liberty begins with limiting a government run by executive orders and bureaucratic regulations, preventing unfettered one-party control, and clawing back the Supreme Court precedents that give the president and federal bureaucracies such vast authority. So voters get a choice in these big choices. Their next opportunity is January 5th in Georgia. Now, it was penned by Charles Lipson at the Peter B. Urisma Professor of Political Science Emeritus at the University of Chicago, where he founded the program on international politics, economics, and security. And, of course, you can reach him at charles.lipson, Lipson, at Gmail. Pretty interesting article right there. So, it does raise quite a question, does it not? So, Yes, the stakes are indeed high. We know that. We know that obviously from the standpoint of how POTUS has had to maneuver in order to drain the swamp, that a lot of things happened to lead us to that point. We knew that 44, when he was in office, pretty much ruled with a pen and a phone, if you recall, right? Congress be damned. We don't need no stinking laws. We don't need to pass no stinking bills. Well, aside from the Obamacare, which, of course, we had to pass so we could find out what was in it. But hey, otherwise, everything is by executive decree. So, do we have a king, or do we have a president, or are we going to rein this sucker in? And so, if you recall back to POTUS's 2017 inauguration speech, you recall that he says today is the day we start to restore the power back to the people. So, should this election make its way through, get the Republicans in, whether you like them or not, whether they be rhinos or what have you, I think it's probably going to go a long ways for him to continue down the path of restoring power to the people. And of course, we're going to have to root out the corruption that has taken place, the fraudulent voting machines and everything else, as we see it laid bare across the land. And of course, the Mockingbird media would have us believe, that's not really happening. Nope, and we're seeing everything being exposed at this point, right? So, very, very interesting. Let's see. So aside from that, one of the other things that I wanted to touch upon here tonight is about the Great Reset, an interesting article by Tom Luongo. I've frequently read some of his articles. He had an interesting take. Recently I covered a pretty decent show on that over on Tiger Network. If you missed that, you can head over to Torah3.com and look for my name there and check out that show. So we get into this. Says Argentina. Opposition builds to Great Reset. Who's next? And so, update mea culpa. This is not news, but an historical reminder of what happens when the people get fed up with a corrupt government incapable of serving their interests. Or, I suppose if you put that in Q terminology, these people will not be able to walk the streets, right? Is that day not quickly approaching? So remember this, the president of Argentina has left the building, according to the Daily Mail 20 years ago. It says President Fernando de la Rúa resigned and fled the government palace in a helicopter driven from office by a devastating economic crisis and days of rioting that left 22 people dead and homes and supermarkets across Argentina ransacked. Fast forward to today. This is the news. Police faced rioters with stones this week. And there's a clip from West Coast in Argentina. It says like a MF Million Man Dodgeball. An interesting video there. It says this is what the face of real anger and desperation in the face of a government that is equal parts corrupt and inept looks like. No one wants to see this kind of abuse of any other human being. It's anathema to life itself, but everyone makes a choice. The police choose to put on their uniforms and riot shields to enforce immoral orders, while the people make the choice to stand up to it. It is the fundamental problem of rule through force that eventually leads to these regrettable outcomes. No one wants to see policemen, presumably decent men with the right motivations to maintain societal order, stoned in public. But when people have had their ability to make their grievances heard peacefully taken away from them, they will, eventually, make their grievances heard violently. It reminds me of a quote, right? Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable, I believe is the quote. It's who we are. It's human nature. And the lesson here is for all of these would-be tyrants currently laughing about winning a fraudulent election in the U.S. through changing the rules is that they will face this same moment as these cops did very soon. because elections are the opportunity for us to air our grievances with our government peacefully. And what so many in politics fail to understand, but what the people who voted for Donald Trump do, is that these past two elections haven't been referenda on Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump. They have been referenda on the whole political class and culture, which has driven people to the edge of insanity, bankruptcy, and despair. So, laugh it up, Stacey Abrams, Rahm Emanuel, Barack Obama, Dan Crenshaw, and Mitt Romney. Watch this video carefully. This is your future. The same goes for Tony Blair, Emmanuel Macron, Bill Gates, Angela Merkel, George Soros, and Benjamin Netanyahu. You may scare people into taking your vaccine and issuing your medical passports, but what happens on the day when the cops fail to show up to control the crowd for fear of being stoned? The same people today screaming, "My body, my choice," will line up for their COVID-19 vaccine if it means they can't continue infecting the minds of students with critical race theory. Congratulations on turning everyone into a desperate, cognitively dissonant response monkey. That stuff cuts both ways, folks. Obedience is not acquiescence. No one really loves Big Brother, no matter how much you torture them. The longer you suppress the anger, the worse it gets, until it explodes. And people won't be turning that anger on the idiots on the streets in Portland. We've seen what it looks like when the would-be tyrants riot. The ideologically possessed race hustlers and commies in Antifa and BLM. We haven't seen what it looks like when the conscientious right, who just want to live without abuse, looks like. Well, in fact we do. They vote twice, overwhelmingly, for Donald Trump, and throw British tea into Boston Harbor. They veto legislation designed to sell their people out to the Politburo and Brussels. Italians will soon have to make their choice. And it's highlighting a tweet from Brie A. Dale, says, #breaking Italian conservatives are calling for PM #Conti to resign, shouting "Liberty, Liberty," in open protest against #COVID-19 restrictions. Travel restriction will be tightened starting 21st December, with many regions even restricting #Christmas and midnight mass. So yeah, basically trying to cancel Christmas on lockdowns that we know do not work at all. This isn't a breakdown of the civil order. This is the beginning of a restoration of civil order that is already gone. The idea that we, the people, control our elected officials governing us is rapidly being revealed as a lie, and it leaves people with no other option than violence. This is why, in my mind, the election fraud is a single issue that we have to come together on. Democrat, Republican, and, yes, you too feckless and cowardly libertarians. Because it's not about the mechanics of voting. It's not about its inherent immorality. At certain moments in time, the value of your vote and what it represents rises above all that. It is still the least violent act one can take in conjunction with others to say, "No more, that's enough." I didn't vote for Trump because I thought he did a good job while in office. I voted for Trump twice because I wanted to stick my finger in the eye of people who have materially made my life and the lives of millions of people around the world worse. I voted for Trump to bitch slap Nancy Pelosi, laugh at Chuck Schumer, and put James Comey in jail. I voted for Trump to blow up the false dyad of Republican versus Democrat, out Lindsey Graham, and rein in the military surveillance state. I didn't vote for Trump for a tax cut, though it was a nice bonus. My price is a metric shit ton higher than you wretched trolls. Trump stood up to them for 4 years, and by doing so exposed them to such an extent I never thought possible. And now, he and all the people who voted for him are being laughed at by corrupt state legislators, judges, election officials, and party hacks. The normie Republicans think the Georgia runoff elections matter. Without an overhaul of the voting systems themselves, what does it matter if 2 Democrats win or 2 rhinos do? And do you really think the outcome of that runoff hasn't already been determined? It's all a rigged game. And now that that has been fully exposed, what comes next? Because many people in the U.S. are coming to the same conclusions as those people throwing rocks at cops in Argentina. That their government is terminal, its authority illegitimate, and its edicts unworthy. I've been long guillotines and rope makers for the past 18 months. I may have to double down my position. So again, quite an interesting article via Tom Luongo. He always manages to pen some thoughtful articles, certainly. So yes, let's see here. Yeah, you guys are awful quiet out there. Must just be sitting back and enjoying the fire. That's alright. Get the old coffee, get the old mug of hot chocolate, gather round, cold night. Got a little snow and that ready to fly around here pretty soon. About 19 days out from Christmas here. No, Christmas has not been canceled here. Will not be. And even if they try, not going to happen. Alright, so that being said, the last article I will probably hit for the evening. Another interesting article. This is Eric Peters' auto is called The Diaper Report. And this is talking about the COVID-19 business and some of the decisions we may have to make. Just before I popped on here tonight, I just opened an article out of Gateway Pundit that kind of dovetails directly into this. The headline says, "Watch, Oregon teacher has complete meltdown at anti-lockdown protesters, tells them to kill yourself." What sort of rabid idiotness have these people been under to propose that? Where is the decency? Where is the humanity? What gives them the right at the end of the day? Says, I parted ways yesterday with a friend of more than 20 years, standing over his sickness and my refusal to indulge it or even pretend to ignore it. This ex-friend says I should don the holy rag because I might be asymptomatic, and because I ought to show a little respect for your fellow man, that it's not all about you, he added. Grow your own food and you don't need to interact with people. But if you want the benefits of society, you have to participate and conform a bit. Italics added. So, I said goodbye. I have to conform a bit? I am obliged to literally show that I supposedly agree with the outrageous assertion that I might be sick, in effect, asymptomatic, and so present an ongoing, never-ending threat to other people that require me to wear a face diaper, the religious vestment of the sickness cult, to assuage their fears? I attempted to reason with this friend. It was like attempting to discuss Euclid with a rooster. I'm not sick, I texted him. I've had 2 friends die from it, he texted back, and several still sick. Me? Well, I'm not sick. Therefore, I cannot transmit sickness. Therefore, wearing a rag over my face serves no medical purpose. Him. You might be asymptomatic. Me? Okay, so you're saying that the possibility I might be sick, even though I'm not coughing or sneezing or manifesting any symptoms of sickness, and so there is no evidentiary specific reason to suppose I am in fact sick, much less contagious, obligates me to act as if I am in fact sick and contagious, and to literally put on something as a protective measure just in case, and to ease your fears? In that case, why shouldn't you be obligated to turn in your guns? My ex-friend likes guns, since many people are quite terrified of them and fear you might use them to harm them or someone they care about. If my fear that you might be or do something is enough to impose an obligation on you, then how do you feel about being made to wear an armband or similarly high visible item indicating that you are gay? My ex-friend is homosexual. and thus a potential transmitter of AIDS? The fact is, you could possibly transmit AIDS. You might spit on me. You might rape someone. These are just as possible as you might be asymptomatic. And of course, they've got an interesting clip here dating back to an old Seinfeld episode. One that I recall from back in the day of watching Seinfeld, where Kramer wouldn't wear the AIDS ribbon. What? You won't wear the ribbon? That sound like the French guys there, but it's kind of the same deal. Funny as it was back then, we're seeing it play out real time here today. I says he didn't like that much, and that was the end of the texting and the friendship. I do not mourn the loss, because I understand this person is not and may never have been my friend. A friend doesn't threaten violence, nor countenance its threat. Yet that is precisely what my ex-friend advocates, in a mewling, gaslighting way. When he urges me to wear a mask, to show a little respect for my fellow man, and then says I am obliged to conform a little bit. He means obey, and not merely obey, I must agree. I must show that I agree by wearing a visible accoutrement of agreement, like the wearing of an armband in another time. And of course that would be the Nazi flag that the SS folks wore on the side of their uniforms back in the day. To not wear the armband then or the holy rag now is to give visual evidence of non-agreement, and that is what these creeps cannot stand. Not that we are asymptomatic and might be plague carriers, but that we disagree with them, that we do not share their virtuous hypochondria, and by showing that we do not share it shows contempt for it. My now ex-friend supports my being made to conform a little bit, and you, too. They will cheer when we are hounded by the Gesundheit Polizei for not wearing the holy rag and soon refusing to allow ourselves to be injected with God knows what. They'll support our being excommunicated from life, not allowed to transact business, buy food. If you want the benefits of society, you have to participate and conform a bit. Such people are no friends of mine. The words attributed to Edward I, the Longshanks, comes to mind. A man does good business when he rids himself of a turd. So, yeah, interesting way to conclude the article, but nonetheless, you get the idea. I think it's absolutely that. They cannot stand the fact that you do not conform. That's the whole herd mentality, right? Everybody must do it. Everybody must for the sake of everybody else, for the quote-unquote common good that we hear everybody, or the common quip that we see put out there, we're in this together. Bullshit. We're not in this together. We never have been. It's about individuality. Maybe I need to go back and read a little Ayn Rand. Help these people understand what was meant by it. Dear God. But that's the problem that they have, is the nonconformists. They think that everybody has to be sheep. Well, guess what? There's a few sheepdogs in the crowd that do not go along with the rest of the sheep, because we are able to think for ourselves. You know? Kind of the same reason the mockingbird media attacks the Q phenomena, right? At the end of the day, oh, it's a crazy conspiracy and all this and that. Oh, the greatest conspiracy of, a cult that thinks for themselves and actually does research for themselves rather than buying up the BS out of the mockingbird media and the crap that the social media folks now present as truth. You know, the Ministry of Truth that Facebook is going to become here shortly. Because they're going to not allow any sort of dissension of any sort of communication about vaccinations whatsoever. They're just going to spew the truth out for us. Right? Zucky? Yeah. That's where it's headed. Until we put a stop to it. Why do you think POTUS is talking about Section 230 being a national security threat at this point? Why do you think people are flocking to the parlors and Gabs and that and getting away from Twitter, where people get thrown in Twitterazzi jail and Facebook jail, timeout sessions, for wrongthink? 1984 coming directly to life. That's exactly where they want us to be, and they can't stand it. Another article in the last couple days talked about Parler as well, and the fact that the Twitterazzi can't stand that there's another platform out there. Bill Gates had to chime in and say, well, there's a bunch of crazies over there. Psh, as if he knows. Insanity. So, yeah, those are the couple, 2-3 articles now that I wanted to hit tonight. Obviously, there's lots of other stuff going on. I'll quick flash through what is on the old Q notables for the day. And we'll probably call that a night unless you guys got anything else you want to cover here. Like I said, just a nice night for a fire. A little casual discussion here. We'll see if we can get back in the swing of doing a few of these regularly, aside from the regular shows that I've been doing. If you're not following those, be sure to follow on Gab for when I post those out. The old Midnight Rider series now that I've been doing here as of late. Covering the COVID-19 business, covering the Great Reset, the election coverage, which, by the way, I'm going to go ahead and put this link out there for those interested. As of right now, since Election Day, I'm sitting on a trove of about 3,800 articles to date. 3,800. Now, why is that important? Well, the Mockingbird media, the pundits, the justices in our corrupt just-us system seem to think that there is no evidence whatsoever of any sort of election fraud. Well, that link there will take you to a spreadsheet full of evidence, video evidence, the court cases, the affidavits, the data behind some of these graphs and so forth that we see, and that is current through about this morning. And I will continue to do that until this thing reaches its logical conclusion. And at the end of the day, I would sincerely hope when this is said and done that a couple things happen. And I think this is where we got to come in and put our heads together and make it happen. Because it's not going to happen by itself. The government is not going to reform itself. We should know that by now. They can investigate themselves all they want, like in the days of Eric Holder, and find themselves guilty of no wrongdoing, right? But a couple things need to happen. Number one, resurrection of the 13th Amendment, the true blue 13th Amendment, where the dual allegiance of citizens, not allegiant to this country, dual citizenship, all that stuff, talked about in the Federalist Papers, talked about in the Constitution. The original 13th Amendment that prohibits the attorneys and lawyers from being on the land. Why? Because they are tied to the British Accreditation Registry, the BAR. It is an allegiance to London Central, the four ends. Get them gone. Get them off the land. Number two, I think the other thing that needs to happen is pull the licenses of all these mainstream crooks that have followed the legalized propagandization and disinformation and misinformation campaigns that are playing out. And so I think that is yet another thing. And it's not a matter of putting a petition together to the FCC. No. We need to demand it. Get it done, Ajit Pai. We're not going to sit by and accept no for an answer. Pull their licenses. Pull them off the airwaves. They're done. And in conjunction with that, we pull their charters. Physically pull their charters for them to operate in commerce on these lands. Get them gone. They are a threat to we the people, period. And there's some other things, but I think those two would probably go a long way. And of course, most folks know my position on the Fed. Obviously, we know gold destroys the Fed. That would certainly go a long ways in rectifying a lot of the quote-unquote inequality that we see. Not inequality of opportunity, but at the end of the day, the inequality of salaries that we see where CEOs make 500 times more than the lowest rung on the totem pole of their respective organizations. And of course, we may see that work itself out here by way of the whole COVID business here before long, because all the little mom and pop shops are having to close up while all the big box stores and that get richer, right? So, yeah, I think those couple, 2-3 things would certainly go a long way to restoring the republic. Not the democracy. I'm tired of hearing about democracy. I don't want to hear democracy. That's what they think that they rule by, 51% rule. No, not going to happen. We're going to restore the right of the individuals, as it should have been from the start. Benjamin Franklin said. As he walked out, the gal asked him, he says, "What do we have, Mr. Franklin?" And he says, "A republic, if you can keep it." And that's what we need to do. We need to restore it. So, like I said, some other things floating about there tonight, coming off the old notables. Code Monkey says, "Do you think the FBI will act on the bag of USB drives they found?" Talking about the voter fraud. I think not. I think the FBI is one of those institutions that it too, gone. Pull it, get it gone. Blast it into 1,000 pieces like what JFK wanted to do with another 3-letter agency. At U.S. Army, special operations are just that. Special units dedicated to missions outside the normal military operation. But which branch has the most of these soldiers? Hashtag soldiers. Good question. Intel chief urges John Durham to release interim report in order to protect investigation. And I'll tell you, that has probably been one of the most disappointing things to see out of all this. Certainly makes you wonder what it was all for, with all these quote-unquote sealed indictments since 2017, north of, what are we, 100,000, 200,000, whatever, nah, 200,000. We're not out for a report. I don't give a damn about a report. We need heads rolled. We need to see arrests, bottom to top, low people on the totem pole rolling up to the top people on the pole. Period. I don't care about a report. They can issue all the reports they want. They don't mean squat. The report, Joe Biden to tap California AG Xavier Becerra for his HHS secretary. Oh, isn't that just dandy? What a great crew he's assembling. I'm glad he's actually doing that for everybody to see, right? Same thing with, 44. It's pretty much 44's agenda that was picked by, who was it, Citibank at the time? I think Citibank pretty well picked all of 44's cabinet back then. Today, it looks like BlackRock is pretty well the one calling the shots, whereas under POTUS here it was Goldman Sachs. So the banksters still do, and the hedge funders still do have quite a bit of control and say as to who goes in those particular positions. That needs to be changed, certainly. Let's see. Trump terminates Chinese cultural exchange programs, decries soft power propaganda tools. Yeah, I just saw an article along those lines on Zero Hedge here late tonight. And of course, this probably also ties into the Chinese institutes and the colleges and everything else. Same thing, pushing the propaganda and crap. Bankers and traders deemed essential will receive priority access for COVID vaccines. Huh, interesting. So wait a minute, help me understand this virus again. So if I'm a banker or trader, apparently, I suppose if you've got money, you can just bypass the whole virus, sit in first class, and magically the virus doesn't transmit from first class back to economy class on a plane. Is that how that works? Very, very interesting. Most selective virus ever. I swear. Let's see. A third suspect from State Farm Center suitcase scandal identified as Ralph Jones Sr., who was in the news for a shady deal with Atlanta Mayor Keisha Bottoms. Oh, so we're getting more revelations around that after the hearing the other day. That's good. From August, software company Skynamo opens North American headquarters in Cobb County. So the Anons are digging on that. I haven't come across any articles regarding that, but probably will in the next 24 hours, I'm sure. Well, this is fun. Smartmatic CEO tapped to head Soros' Open Society Foundation. Yeah, I saw that earlier today. Lord Mark Malik is now going to chair Soros' Open Society Foundations, which, by the way, was the CEO of Smartmatic, and their ties to Dominion and everything else. We know that. It's pretty well out in the open. You can find the SEC filings and everything else. It's all out there. Don't let the Mockingbird media tell you otherwise. Let's see. This is bigger than me. Georgia's Ruby Freeman lawyers up. Cancels interview. Wonder why she would do that. If you've got nothing to hide, it's the same thing that happened with Dominion here a couple weeks back. They were expected to sit in front of a hearing in Pennsylvania, and then instead of joining the friendly little confines of a little hearing, they decided to lawyer up. Because an innocent company totally does that, right? The Iwan brothers had secret server while Becerra was caucus chair. Oh yeah. Lest we forget about old Xavier Becerra. What a standout character he is. CNN, New York Times arrive at same China virus conclusion as Trump, Bannon, 1 year later. Alright, so yeah, they're just a little late to the party. And oh, by the way, it was Zero Hedge, I believe, back in January now, that got booted off Twitter for being just a little bit too truthful and asking too many good questions at the onset, which they were pretty well vindicated about 6-8 months later, and did actually have their Twitter account restored, called out by some BuzzFeed hack at the time. But I digress. In any case, let's see, voting machine certification. Oh, wait a minute, let's back up a couple here. I missed one. Let's see. Oh, there we are. Ryan Jack Cobb used to work for Cyber Inc. and Weil Laboratories, now owned by Halliburton. His former co-workers Wendy Owens and Diane Gray joined him at Pro V&V. Not sure where that's headed. I'm assuming it's all tied to the election stuff. DIG, Allied Security Operations Group, probably more of the same. John Brennan lies about the Steele dossier. Fox News, Chris Wallace just nods along. Yeah, like the little puppy dog that he is, right? Chris Wallace, enjoy those paychecks while you can, man. Enjoy them while you can. They're not gonna last. Project Veritas, hashtag CNN Raw, 9/15/20. So did Veritas release yet another? Is that the consensus? I know they had released 2 already behind the scenes of what a great guy old Zucker is, right? In 2013, voting machine certification labs always took place in Huntsville, Alabama, irrespective of where their headquarters were. Interesting. So where are certification of the machines done today? A new at DJT watch at Mark Levin show at 11 p.m. now, and Steve Hilton X at 12 a.m. on the great election fraud of 2020. So apparently more coming out there. I'll see it in the articles tomorrow, and I'm sure the cut-ups will be in there on the Gateway Pundits and Epoch Times, who have, in my opinion, those are probably the 2 best sites to follow at the moment in terms of the election coverage, is probably Gateway Pundit and Epoch Times. It says more on Ralph Jones Sr. was uttered by loudmouth Gabriel Sterling. Son Ralph Jones Jr. is the official spokesman for Democrat U.S. Senate candidate Warnock, linked to Stacey Abrams. Well, isn't that just dandy? Yeah, those who speak the loudest, right? Let's see. Plane fags, obviously tracking the planes. DeKalb County cannot find chain of custody records for absentee ballots deposited in drop boxes. It has not been determined if responsive records to your request exist. Oh, these guys are just frickin' dandy. Just absolutely dandy. These guys are being... The light shown on these cockroaches is intense. They've got nowhere to run. Obama school basketball jersey breaks sale record in auction, sold for $192,000. Great. Trump administration shuts down Chinese cultural exchange programs, calls them soft power propaganda tools. So I guess that one was repeated. And Mike Flynn says he has put the fear of God into Obama. Interesting. Very, very interesting. And there you have it here for a Sunday night kind of wrap. Like I said, I kind of wanted to hit some of the major themes and that we're seeing play out across the landscape, talking about the election, talking about COVID, the fallout, and of course the Great Reset. Those seem to be kind of the major three. One of these days, we'll probably have to get back into some of the other goings on around the country, around the world, some of the hot spots and that going on out in the Middle East, flare-ups and that in Syria, Iran, trying to drum stuff up there. And I'm sure it won't be long. We'll probably be hearing about North Korea and everything else, and we'll see from there. But nonetheless, appreciate you guys joining here for tonight for a little fireside. Like I said, we'll get back to doing a few of these here again real soon. And so stay tuned in that regard. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Michael, Charmaine Park, American Citizen Patriot over on the D-Live side, Dogs at Play. Let's see, who else we got in here tonight? Lisa Meyer, good to see you guys all in here. So maybe I'll do one of these a little bit earlier in the night so as it's not too terrible late. But nonetheless, that'll probably do it here for tonight. Appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will see you back next